The history of the left is to a large extent associated with associations and splits of left organizations and parties, common political action, and splinter groups, demands for struggles based on unity, and struggle for clear political positions. In many cases, supporters of each stance have emphasized the connection between their beliefs and the prospects of overcoming capitalism, either through social revolution or reforms. The prominent idea of one class, one party, the divisions in the First, Second, and Third International, the demand for united or popular fronts, the fragmentation of the left today, and last but not least, the existence of organizations and parties like Syriza, the Left Unity in the UK, the new Anti-Capitalist Party in France, the United Left in Spain, and Left Bloc in Portugal, are examples that despite their differences are related to the question of unity on the left. However, the demand for left unity remains obscure to this day. The call for the unity or rejection of unity is not only used from the left. The demand for national unity is often again a left perspective. Dominant trends inside supranational unions like the EU and NATO also undermine united action. Even in movements from below, the demand for unity, as it was expressed, for example, in Occupy with the slogan, "We are the 99%, is often followed by contradictory results like the re-election of Obama and Merkel. Disputes inside left parties also show the contradictory character of unity today. The panel aims to investigate the need for left unity today, its roots and perspective, and there are some questions that I assume the panelists were shown. One, what is the need for left unity today? How would you define it? Is the demand for left unity radical, and what is its context? 2, where does the demand for rejection of left unity stem from? 3, what was historically the relationship between the left and the demand for unity? Has this demand been justified, and how? 4, the demand for left unity can take many forms. Is this demand social, political? Does it refer to the economic interest of the majority? Is it a demand for common action at a practical level? 5, what is the relationship between the demand for left unity and class consciousness? Is this demand related to the idea of social emancipation, and if yes, how? 6, many times the demand for unity is used as a sign of democratic function or as a weapon against bureaucracy. Would you agree with this view? Is this demand new? And if yes, what was or is the old? So the two speakers here are James Turley from the Communist Party of Great Britain. He disappeared. And Barbara Dorn of the International Bolshevik Tendency, who will describe her political history if she wants to. Okay. Which one of you wants to go first? Okay, you go first.
When we talk about unity on the left, pretty quickly people think of a particular film, which of course is Monty Python's Life of Brian and the squabbling sect of Judea, arguing over who's going to kick over the Romans instead of kicking out the Romans. But that's a terrible cliche, and I'd rather talk about a different film, which is Louis Buñuel's The Street Charm of the Bourgeoisie. In this film, we see a small group of friends from the upper middle class French society trying to have a dinner party, but through various mechanisms of surrealist dream logic, they are unable ever to have their dinner party, either because the host will suddenly overcome the need to have sex in the garden and unable to answer the door, or because they're all killed by Latin American terrorists, or it's all they keep waking up in each other's dreams in Inception style, and somehow they can never quite get together and have their dinner party. And it seems to me a fairly good model for talking about left unity, because it's straightforwardly unity on the left. It's obvious from simply the nature of organisations that they are effective when they're bigger, and then an organisation of 5,000 people is more than 100 times as effective as an organisation of 50 people. It's an exponential curve, as it were. And the fact that we are dissolved into small organisations and often just scattered individuals, renders us extraordinarily ineffectual. It's particularly obvious in this country because some of the older, larger organisations have, in the case of the Communist Party, simply disappeared, and there's not really much left of them. But there's a deeper issue, which is that for the working class to effectively function, fight for its class interests, it intrinsically needs to collectivise its activities. The working class is the class which has no independent assets and the means of production. It is reliant on the social wage fund, and its power is fundamentally power in numbers. That a broad-based class organisation can, even on the most minimal level, win concessions from an employer or win favourable legislation in Parliament in a sort of pressure groupy sort of a way. It's playing that strikes fail when the workforce is disunited and large numbers of people cross the picket line. It's playing that strikes can also fail because they fail to gather support from the communities or working class communities around, say, some workplace, and leave themselves open for scab labour from among the unemployed or the reserve of labour more generally. So it's perfect. It's actually intrinsic to the nature of any project that looks for working class action to require as broad and as close unity as we can get. And it's clear that this is something that a fact of which there is broad awareness in different forms among the different sections of the left. That everyone is concerned that we should be united in some way or another, and there are various ways in which people attempt to unite. But it seems that this just proves impossible because of some strange Buñuel-esque underlying drive. We are never quite able to have our dinner party, and unity projects flower briefly and collapse and multiply in the same way that the pre-existing groups have done at an earlier date. There are various ways in which people have traditionally attempted to unite the left. The most kind of obvious is a sort of the traditional far-left organisation. In the British context, I particularly have in mind Trotskyist organisations, but there are similarities with Maoism in other countries, and with some reservations among larger official communist parties, which is which demands quite a very close degree of unity among its members, that there will be particular theoretical traditions that need to be defended, that these traditions mark the group out as its kind of specific identity. You think of the Socialist Workers' Party in this country and how much of its identity revolves around the fact that they analyse the USSR as a capitalist regime of a funny type. And thus there is a kind of resistance to allowing the appearance of political differences in the organisation, that they tend to quickly go, as it were, from a scratch to gangrene, as Trotsky put it, precisely a meaningful mechanism for challenging the defenders of the great tradition. Disagreements almost invariably lead to splits. There is the initial, in the other direction, this also renders extraordinarily difficult the idea that the possibility of a traditional left group regrouping with another traditional left group. Of course, such things are hardly unheard of, but it would be intolerable for the SWP members to be in the same organisation as another Trotskyist group that holds the Trotsky's traditional view of the Soviet state, despite the fact that the Soviet state no longer exists. because it would have been giving up something extraordinarily, in their view, precious and fundamental to their organisation. In preference to that, one sees rather such groups attempting to set up broad unity with other forces, whether that's in the form of some kind of party or electoral vehicle, say, or an organisation for a single issue type campaign. So what then happens is that the politics are set at a kind of lowest common denominator and kept at a level that will be acceptable to what they imagine their broader audience could be. Typically in this country, it's a sort of image of disaffected old Labourites who don't like the way things have been going since Blair, or so on and so forth. And then, once people are recruited, they will come into contact with the revolutionaries, which is always one's own group, and be dazzled by the acuity of the group's analysis and join up. The trouble is that the groups don't really have disagreements over what the lowest common denominator should be, because their particular differences over political strategy means that they think there's different sorts of things will be attractive to old Labourites or so on and so forth. But they are unable to have these high-level discussions because to do so would be to expose the fact that the right wing of a given broad organisation is typically a phantom, and that really it is just old-fashioned trot groups. So again, because these differences are repressed in a peculiar way, you end up with splits. It's clear in this country we had the Socialist Alliance, and initially the largest organisation in it was the Socialist Party, the former militant tendency. And they walked out when the Socialist Workers' Party came in because they would no longer have overall control, and the Socialist Workers' Party would in practice get to set the day-to-day agenda of the Socialist Alliance. And this was intolerable to them. Even though what they would actually be advocating would be quite similar, it was still intolerable that the SWP would be benefiting from this broad front rather than they themselves. There is another kind of response to this, which is a kind of rejection of the sect model entirely, normally from people who have just become disillusioned with it. That instead we regroup on a very minimal basis. This is what you see with something like the Anti-Capitalist Initiative, which was an ephemeral organisation mostly composed of people who used to be in workers' power, that they consistently refused to adopt any politics at all because that would alienate one or another element of their constituency. And in this situation, of course, if you have a minority viewpoint, it's perfectly possible to express it. But of course, it's meaningless because, if you say, I think we should be doing this, comrades, they will say, yeah, sure, whatever, you go and do that. But it doesn't actually operatively result in any control over the organisation, so any more than if you were a low-level grunt in the SWP. And so these organisations tend to be ephemeral, and indeed the ACI had a sort of closing down conference where they decided, for the most part, to fold into another similar organisation, the International Socialist Network, but because they don't actually have any means to demand that their membership as a whole do that, they couldn't actually agree even to do that. So it still sort of continues in some phantom way in Manchester or something. But it comes to something when your group can't even liquidate itself. And the sort of final, we're sort of picking our way down the food chain here, and the final response is something that is traditionally been quite common in sort of lefty academic type fads, which is the sort of valorization, the kind of celebration of disunity, that it's great because we have this enormously diverse movement, the Hart and Negri's multitude, and there's another kind of contemporary variant of it would be the sort of intersectionality identity politics, where It's precisely about one individual's particular experience and sort of the kind of protection of that. So we end up in this kind of bizarre universe where unity is actually a hindrance, but of course such things end up being pretty ineffectual themselves as well, and the turnover of such fads is quite aggressively fast, looking at it from an outside perspective. At this point, you kind of want to take a step back and think about, well, what is it that, when we talk about left unity, what is it we're trying to do? I mean, who are we trying to unite? And the truth is, on the larger scale, I think probably most people agree that we want, a mass movement for socialist overthrow of society, or capitalist society. This means uniting, depends who you ask, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And the issue with people is that they tend to have opinions of their own. You cannot possibly unite people on that large scale on the old-fashioned sect model, because it's implausible that you will get that level of agreement. And indeed, would we want to? I mean, our overall project is to kind of replace bourgeois rule with a kind of democratic rule of the working class. That the working class, as the leader of the whole society, will have a meaningful amount of control over that society, and that means that if we're trying to organise a party to achieve that, what we're doing is trying to prepare people to take on that role, and that means we need to get them making meaningful decisions about the project now. It means they need to have significant control over the organisation. So there must be a way for minority ideas to become majority ideas in an organisation without it leading to fragmentation. The CPGB's traditional approach to this is partyism, I would suppose is the word. We are not a party ourselves. It's a slightly misleading name, but we keep the name because what we want is a party, is a mass organisation for political action of the working class, independent political action of the working class. And this requires certain forms of organisation. It requires a democratic culture of polemic where people are able to express their minority opinions or indeed able to sharply criticise their opinions in the organisation, whether they're official positions or minority positions, and do so not with various pettifogging little rules being set up for how you can do it. The SWP famously only allows dissent in a 3-month period between September and December in the run-up to its conference. And even then you have to do it exactly right, which is a sort of silly approach.
Then you're expelled.
Oh yeah. If you're unlucky, then you can do everything right and still get turfed out. It's absurd. And also we want to encourage initiative. People need to be able to take initiatives at local level. So decisions. We don't want some central committee micromanaging every last decision of every factory branch in wherever. We want people to be able to kind of use their initiative, be encouraged to use their initiative. But we also need these decisions to be binding. Otherwise, we're in the situation of the ACI where nothing is binding, and therefore any power you have is rendered effectively meaningless, and you may as well just be an isolated individual. We also argue that the basis of political unity should be a programme. I did mean to bring one, but I forgot it. I was going to wave it around and point out one very important thing about it, which is that it's very short, our programme. It's very short. It doesn't contain elaborate essays on the falling rate of profit, the nature of the Soviet Union, but it contains a kind of a political strategy for implementing a state form that can be the vehicle for working class rule. That's the point. We want to agree on strategy and the line of march, and have within that latitude for people to disagree and latitude for people to take their own initiatives. And the other advantage of a program is that it renders everyone accountable, including the leadership. You know, you're supposed to be doing this, you just went off and did the opposite. So what's up with that, comrade? You don't get that with, you know, an organisation where the program is basically what the leaders think that day, because how can you possibly challenge that? We also finally think that a program should be explicit about its aims, that it should be explicitly about overthrowing capitalism and about the revolutionary methods that we advocate, rather than hiding behind some broad lowest common denominator politics, which, as I've tried to explain, inevitably itself leads to disunity counterintuitively. We're out there and we can really then actually try and build support for the damn thing, rather than playing silly buggers and trying to goal people into something that they didn't sign up for. So that's a very ambitious goal, and it's a long-term project, and the failure to build unity very short-termism.
Thank you.
The People's Front of Judea, but we also get what is a serious question, which is why can't all you left groups just get together? And I think this deserves a serious answer from people who should already really know the answer and tend to phrase it in more sophisticated terms, like left unity is the one currently being used on the British left and is the topic of this forum. So left unity, to even start to answer this question, poses two other questions before we even get started. And one of them is, what do we mean by left? And the other is, what do we mean by unity? So left in Britain gets used to refer to everything from sometimes the Lib Dems, when you're talking about voting out the Tories, to the Greens, to the Labour left, to self-defined socialists of a whole range of types, to anarchists, to genuine communists, everything in between. In other countries, there's other variants of that, everything to Obama gets called the left at some point or another.
Communist, isn't he?
So they say. So what left as a term doesn't refer to is the working class. And for us, it's the political consciousness of the working class that's of central importance to achieving these goals that many of us share, whether it's winning a particular strike or carrying out a successful socialist revolution. That broadest possible unity of the working class against the capitalists and their states. That's the kind of unity that we need. So on the face of it, it might seem that the best way to achieve this kind of unity would be to unify all the existing tendencies that represent or seek to represent the working class, and then exclude bourgeois forces like the Greens and so on, and then democratically sort out these differences as we engage in real life struggle. And in fact, something like this was the model for the First International, in which Karl Marx played a prominent role in the 1860s and early 1870s, and for the Second International, founded in 1889, which came to encompass such disparate formations as the British Labour Party, the German SPD, or the Russian SDLP, Socialist Democratic Labour Party. And of course there were always elements that couldn't be contained in this common framework, but the general idea of working class political unity in the form of a single party of the class was defended by virtually every leading socialist. In Karl Kautsky's formulation, one class, one party, or to put it the other way around, a party of the whole class. Now, on the revolutionary left wing of the Second International, principally led by Lenin's Bolshevik faction and the fragmented Russian party, the idea of the party of the whole class had, as early as 1912, come into conflict with the need to defend the programme of working class unity, the actuality of working class unity in the form of social revolution. And Lenin noted in April 1914 in a little piece called, appropriately enough, Unity, he said, "Unity is a great thing and a great slogan, but what the workers' cause needs is unity of Marxists, not unity between Marxists and opponents and distorters of Marxism." So it would take around that time two related world historic events to definitively break the genuine Marxists from those old organisational frameworks of the party of the whole class. It radically changed our understanding of how we achieve this revolutionary working class unity. On the 4th of August 1914, deputies of the SDP betrayed the working class by voting in the Reichstag to grant funds to Germany to wage the imperialist war that had just broken out. A betrayal of all the principles that they thought the Second International stood for. In October 1917, just a few months later, a few years later, Lenin's Bolsheviks overthrew the Russian bourgeoisie in the face of opposition from the right wing of the Russian workers' movement, the Mensheviks and the right-wing social revolutionaries. So it had become clear that political unity with forces that were committed, openly or not, to preserving the bourgeois order meant unity with the capitalist class against the unity of the working class. And achieving working class unity against the bourgeoisie would require Marxists to win over the majority of the working class through sharp political struggle against and organisational independence from the reformists and the centrists. And the Third Communist International was founded on an explicitly revolutionary basis. And this idea is what we often call Leninism or Bolshevism. It's encaptured in that idea we were talking this morning about what is Leninism. So James made the point that bigger organisations are more effective, but I think you have to ask the question, what are they effective at doing? And in 1914 the Second International was very effective at betraying the working class, and that's not the kind of organisation we need. And the Comintern recognised this, and steps were taken, the famous 21 conditions, to exclude reformists and centrists and make sure they weren't admitted to the Comintern, that it actually was a revolutionary organisation. And for some, combined with their disgust over this outright treachery of the Second International, these measures were used by some ultra-left tendencies to argue against working with social democrats in any fashion at all. But this organisational unity of genuine Marxists that had been established around the Third International against non-Marxist tendencies does not preclude a different form of unity in action with reformists and other political currents. So after intense debate, the Comintern came to advocate the United Front, precisely this sort of temporary unity in action around clear objectives, such as a strike, a demonstration against imperialist war, preventing a fascist mobilisation, a defence campaign for a working class political prisoner. In a united front like this, Marxists maintain their own separate political organisation and don't stop criticising their bloc partners. And the United Front is an opportunity for Marxists to demonstrate in practice and through the propaganda they're putting out at the same time that Marxists and not reformists are the most consistent fighters for the workers' cause. So So what we see today, as James has pointed out, is a fashion for these unity initiatives, like the Linkspartei in Germany, Syriza in Greece, the MPA in France, and a long line of attempts in Britain, of which left unity is the latest manifestation. So what these attempts do is go beyond the kind of unity in action, the united front that I've just been describing, to build unity around, again, James says this as well, I think we agree on this, build unity around a lowest common denominator program, and the idea that these groups that don't share a program, have quite a range of political differences, can put out common propaganda, which is a deception of the workers that they are trying to address this propaganda to, that they do not have a common political line. And this kind of approach, these unity initiatives, these hiding of different programs, are a step backwards from what that realization that came with the Russian Revolution, a step backwards from the Leninist Vanguard Party model that is necessary to break with the reformists in order to have that unity of the working class to actually achieve what the working class needs to. So, but these organisations exist, and we can't pretend that we don't. So we will work with them where possible in common actions. And sometimes we see some potential in these organisations. Sometimes there's a trajectory to the left. There's some room for political debate, and we might even join such a formation in order to influence that trajectory. And we did this in the mid-1990s with the Socialist Labour Party, formed by Arthur Scargill, and there was a trajectory there. There was something in that. It was coming 10 years late, but coming out of the biggest class struggle that Britain has seen for many decades, the miners' strike. There was an impulse. There were people that were rethinking their political lives, and there was quite an intense culture of debate at the beginning, which was pretty soon stamped down. But it was an opportunity to intersect that, and Marxists don't step away from these things. We intervene where we can see something with that kind of potential. The Socialist Alliance, which came up shortly afterwards, was the exact opposite. It was the kind of thing that James was describing earlier, where a whole lot of left groups get together and then they choose a programme that's way over to the right of where they actually stand, because they want to attract this mythical right wing. So there's a big difference there, and I think as a Marxist organisation, we don't just chase after all these things. We don't just say, yay, unity. We're looking for trajectory and political promise. We did spend a while inside the ACI that James was talking about earlier. And this was a very different organisation again. It was much smaller than the Socialist Labour Party, but it was ostensibly to the left. It was of groups that self-identified as Trotskyism, who were kicking around some political ideas. And again, we thought there was some room for debate on the left, much like the reason we're on this panel, really. And unfortunately, that proved not to be the case. We did manage to have a couple of debates, but in the end we left the ACI because it wasn't providing that opportunity. But we had no illusions that the ACI was going to turn into some kind of revolutionary organisation. It actually struck me while I was sitting here listening to James that the IBT is often derided as a kind of splitter, tiny organisation, that we are in fact ourselves a product of unity, that we've talked at our workshop today and at other times about our history coming out of the Spartacist League, and when it began to degenerate from its revolutionary days in the early 1980s. But in fact, our comrades came out in 3 different places and separately, and we had people in North America, in the US and Canada, we had people in New Zealand, and we had people in Germany. And after a period of debate and discussion about the program, we decided that with enough of that common heritage, we had enough program in common, so that the international Bolshevik tendency was actually formed around a fusion between these 3 organisations. Okay, we had a pretty shared background, but anti-austerity demonstration in London, and I was selling my paper in 1917. I tried to sell it to this comrade who laughed at me and did the, I don't know if you mentioned Monty Python, but that was his attitude. And he challenged me. It was quite interesting. He said, tell me the top 3 reasons why you have a separate existence from all these other groups. So it was an interesting question. So I'd like to answer that now as to conclude what I say here today, because I think it's really the key question that we need to answer as Marxist revolutionaries is what program do we need to overthrow capitalism? And because I'm debating James here, I think I need a little caveat here based on our conversations earlier, in that I think James would agree with me when I say we need a Marxist party around a Marxist program, but we actually have a very different idea about what that program and what that party is. And I think James's program is indeed very small because it doesn't include any theory, and he makes this distinction between theory and program. He said earlier today they deliberately took the theory out of the program, and I think that's wrong. I think theory is a part of program. It informs it, is also a part about action, and program is a guide for action, but without the theory of understanding why we do these things. So the program which I'm about to outline, which is giving this comrade on the demonstration his 3 reasons, is a program of sorts, and it's even shorter than James's. So point number 1 is the state. We say absolutely that capitalism can't be gradually reformed, it must be destroyed. And probably everyone on the left would agree with that. But then when you look at the ramifications of it, we have important political differences with those on the left who say that there's a parliamentary road to socialism, that people who vote for Labour in the belief that it can somehow be reclaimed by the left. We don't see unity with those who believe that the armed bodies of the state, such as the police or prison guards, are part of the workers' movement. And that includes the Socialist Party in Britain, one of the largest groups on the left. I don't think we could have unity with them having a position like that. We don't seek unity with those who call on the state to ban fascist marches, to rely on the state to do that, because these things inevitably get turned around against the left. We have huge differences with those in the trade union movement who won't call to defy the anti-union laws, who instead just plead for them to be repealed through legal channels. We argue that the state is not going to legislate to help us have better strikes. We have to actually go out and take that. And that's a huge issue for us when we're looking at people standing on programs within the trade union movement, standing for positions. Do they actually call for defiance of those anti-union laws, which I don't think we can't seek unity with those who take power in capitalist administrations. And again, we see organisations that are supposedly part of what should be the unity of the left. I mean, I've talked already about the Green Party and that it's not a workers' organisation, it's a bourgeois organisation, but some people still include it. But we've seen the Green Party in Britain, in Brighton on the council administering cuts, and we can't unify with that. And in Germany, the Linkspartei have done the same thing in the city administration in Berlin. Again, that is stepping over the line of unity in the interests of the working class. So that's point number 1, the state. It has huge implications. Point number 2 is internationalism. And I was interested actually at the AWL session this afternoon that Sasha had a similar 3 points, and internationalism was the one we had in common, because actually as the session carried on, it transpired, well, we knew already that the AWL and the IBT have quite a lot of differences about what internationalism entails. So those who support their own ruling class in a war, or who maintain neutrality, as the AWL do, in the face of imperialist attack on a semi-colony, then these people are no friends of working class unity against capitalism. We defend the right of nations to self-determination. That's an important part of our programme. But we're also opposed to socialists who see nationalism as progressive. It's a very different thing. So again, that's a huge barrier to unity, because that is not internationalism, and we're seeing this in the British left now over Scotland. Suddenly Scottish nationalism has become this progressive idea. So that's point number 2. Again, it makes it difficult to unify with a lot of the current left on their current programmes. So 3, the third point, is the independence of the working class. And this is probably the most important, really. I mean, they're all important, but this comes up again and again. It's the role of the working class to defend the rights of all the oppressed, and Lenin talked about the Revolutionary Party as the tribune of the people. But we don't share ideologies such as feminism, which call for unity of women across the class lines. We don't see that as a step forward towards the unity of the working class against the capitalists. We don't see unity with those who want to work in collaboration with the bourgeoisie, people who want to vote for what we call popular front coalitions, electoral blocs between bourgeois parties and workers' parties. Again, we're stepping over that class line. It goes in the opposite direction from working class unity. And this question is the question of the Popular Front is no small matter at all. It's caused the workers' movement to go down in bloody defeat time after time. We saw this in Spain in the 1930s, in Chile in the 1970s. And Trotsky described this, the Popular Front, as the main question of proletarian class strategy for this epoch. But again and again, we were arguing this question with people on the left who seem to be revolutionaries, who claim to be revolutionaries. We have a whole pamphlet debating the CPGB on this, where they say we need to be tactically flexible about this. But it's crucial. It is the only way we are going to make a revolution, is to have unity of the working class, not unity with the capitalists. So this may seem like an argument against unity with all these points, but we do need unity. What we need is unity of the working class. But we need political leadership to that unity. We need the leadership, working class unified under the leadership of a party that's based on a programme like the one I've just sketched out. Obviously, there's a lot more detail needed. And for the working class to take that programme and use it to take power, and that would be the ultimate expression of that unity. But without the programme, with a kind of false unity that disregards programme, that rides over the necessity of it, then we will never achieve this. So it's a long, long road to that point, and I think along that road we're going to see a lot of episodes of unity in action. I hope we will, among the people in this room and much, much further afield. But if we're to succeed, it is also important that we learn when to reject unity, when to understand that people who are offering us unity have politics that are contrary to the historic interests of the working class, and then to say no, to say this unity is not the kind of unity we need. That is the only way that we can move forward.
So just 1 second.
All right.
So we have to sit in silence now, is it?
Or we can say all the really interesting stuff and she won't get it on the tape.
Yeah.
This is a bit where we throw our drinks at each other or whatever, yeah.
No, they just land on me.
That's the plan.
Yeah. You should have got on the wheelie chair so you can sort of scoot out of the way.
British leftist Monty Python fans? They all seem to have seen the movie, or just the one joke.
I think probably everyone on the British left has seen that film, yes.
And sort of winced in some recognition. Yeah, it's a common part of our common political culture, is that joke.
I also like the stuff about, like, what did the Romans ever do for us?
Yeah.
Roads and...
Well, Monty Python were a bit left-wing, so it's kind of one of those things that everyone...
It's kind of it's also a product of the times when, like, there was a more broad sympathy for the left at that point that you could, it was the days when what's his face, Beale, the annoying one, Paul McCartney, would bail out socialist worker when they got sued or whatever.
Are we ready?
We're going.
Okay, so I'm going to exercise my privilege as moderator to direct a few questions at both panelists. So I'm going to start with the question of, so both of you obviously agree on the need for a party, although one of the problems that there definitely exists on the left is many people who think of themselves as leftists or revolutionaries wouldn't necessarily agree on the need for a party at all. And at some point I'd like both of you to address that, the self-evidence of that need. The second question is the phrase "one class, one party" was brought up. So I want to sort of tease that question out about the relationship of class to party and the idea that parties are the representation of particular classes. For example, he spoke of the Greens as a bourgeois parties, right? There were some people from Greens and so forth. Now, I mean, this is a question actually in terms of sort of the difference between an American left and the European left. In the American left, people on the left will say you can't support the Democratic party, which is fairly evident, at least in democracy. But then in Britain, you have the Labour Party, and most Marxists say the Labour Party is different than So, I guess the question is, like, what is the theoretical basis for making such distinction? And maybe that's a particularly American question, but it's something that particularly, I think, tends to puzzle people. What is the basis for saying that there's some fundamental difference between these types of parties? And I guess, like, the other question, which is really directed more at James, like, I have a pretty clear idea of the kind of party Barbara wants. But, like, when, for example, we had that three-cornered discussion, the two of you on the panel here and the guy from the Alliance for Workers' Liberty, I don't think you could be, the CPGB could really be in the same party with AWL. Like, I find it hard to imagine that the three of you, while there was a perfectly intelligent and civilized conversation, I just find it hard to imagine that the three of you could unite. And, Barbara would say, of course we can't unite. We just have fundamental differences. And I would say, well, that does seem to be the case. So the question is, it seems to me you are willing to accept certain greater differences, but then at some point you have, like, some question of principle. But I'm not sure where that line is drawn for you and the CPGB. And I guess, like, the question for Barbara would be, like, which is again, maybe the original question, which is like then would there be any advantage? I mean, this is a question that would come up in, for example, in American context. Would there be any advantage in a mass left social democratic party forming? For example, there's the whole question of the Labor Party. There was a great movement for a Labor Party in the US, particularly in the 90s. It then faded, and which turned out to be a weird farce, because everybody in the Labor Party, there weren't any real labor people. It was just like one sectarian group after another, like each calling the other sectarian, but that's all it was. It was this, like, we're going to build the mass labor party, but of course it wasn't a mass labor party at all. So I guess, like, that would be one question. In other words, like, do you see, like how would you see if you see like a mass revolutionary workers' party emerging, like how would you see us getting from here to there? What kind of situation could create a mass revolutionary workers' party, which obviously the international Bolshevik tendency isn't? And then I'm just like, one final question to both of you. I'm just curious, like when you speak of the far left, or you at one point said the percentage of people who support the far left is similar to what it was in, like the number of people who supported the Communist Party of Great Britain in the 1920s. I'm just curious how much of society you see as actually consciously sympathetic to some kind of Marxist or revolutionary ideas. Because in the United States, it would be like under 1%, certainly. Well, I've tossed out some questions, and then you can respond to each other, and then if people have questions later, we'll take some questions from the audience.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a sort of peculiarity with the discussion in the sense that I commonly find that I can in that sense find often on immediate political questions, with some exceptions that, you know, pointing in the same direction as it were, but then I think there's a point at which kind of erroneous level of kind of purity seems to be required in order for it. I mean, talking about some pamphlet you wrote about us on, I think you subtitled it why not voting Liberal Democrat is a fundamental matter of principle, and it just strikes me as odd, because if you look at the history of the Marxists, if you have like Engels openly toying with the ideas of encouraging voters to vote Tory because they had promised to pass some particular piece of legislation over the head of the Liberals. You have Marx on the American Civil War. You know, he wasn't saying, you know, Lincoln's a terrible charlatan, have nothing to do with him because he's bourgeois. He's saying, look, this is an important moment in history and you want to be on the right side of it. You know, so that's a certain level of kind of, we do not on a routine basis vote we've ever voted Liberal Democrat, and I don't think we'll get the chance to in the next couple of years. But no, it's not really. And the other bit of the Popular Front, I mean, we're both pretty strenuous opponents of Popular Frontism and advocates of independent class politics. But then we ended up having this bizarre argument where when respect was still a thing, you know, we were advocating a vote for those parts of it that were from a traditional workers' movement background. Respect was a sort of that was formed on the back of the anti-war movement in this country by the SWP. They basically went into alliance with George Galloway, who was a Labour MP expelled for calling for British defeat in Iraq, and it included, the idea was that it would be an alliance between quote-unquote secular socialists and Muslim activists, and they were hoping to get like MAB on board, the Muslim Association of Britain, which is the British branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, but they weren't interested, and the only Muslims they got were basically people who owned curry houses in Birmingham and various petty bourgeois around the East London area. So it was a kind of bizarre Popular Front. And our approach to it eventually settled was to call for votes for SWP members, for Galloway, you can argue that either which way, for socialist resistance members who are also involved, and not call for a vote for people who were just like, oh, he's a Muslim, he's anti-war kind of thing. This was intolerable to the IBT because we were voting for advocates of Popular Frontism, but where did we get that tactic from? Trotsky. That's Trotsky's approach to the French Popular Front in 1935. So it's kind of...
So James, like aside from the specifics of the
Yeah.
history, like how do you, like Barbara outlined a pretty classical view of like the relationship of party to class.
Yeah.
Like how do you view that? I mean,
The-
CPGB is a party that does have respect for Kautsky, who
Yeah.
coined that phrase, but you don't seem to agree with one party, one class either.
No, and you know, I think in practical terms, the Second International was not of that character. Was not of that. There was an aspiration, but anarchists were excluded up front. It was defined as a part of international parties who were committed to the political action of the working class. They made a split issue out of standing in elections, for example. But yeah, one party, one class just empirically doesn't work. You do see different parties emerging objectively out of the historical process of different classes. It doesn't work. We are committed to a single party of people who will stand for the independence of the working class and its as a political project for overthrowing capitalism. That's the zero level kind of thing. So it's not one party, one class, because the class is divided. It's a very heterogeneous entity.
But I'm just, James, doesn't that get filtered through specific concrete political issues? Like there was a discussion, you said, well, it's silly to have a discussion about state capitalism, and then the context was brought up about the Korean War, and you said, well, the Korean War is a different thing. But it's hard to sort of separate those type of issues, isn't it? I mean, isn't it hard to say, like, well, we're for every...
Yes,
like,
I mean,
like the AWL would say,
that?
we meet your criteria, right?
They probably would, but again, there
and
is...
you say they don't.
No, they don't, because they do not stand for the independent interest of the working class against the state, because they refuse to criticise, because they are a demobilising influence on and sort of anti-imperialist struggle. Not a very great one, obviously, because there's not very many of them, but it's that's the point. Is precisely the class independence, and my argument is that yes, that this causes division. It is objectively the case that you can, in the short term, by as a sectionalist version of class politics, get concessions by making alliances with the bourgeoisie under certain circumstances. That is an actual pull. So you wouldn't. I don't think it'd be silly to expect that you could build that. And also, there's the question of the state. The state intervenes in the workers' movement, and so there is that kind of issue for it. So this is precisely it. We want unity of Marxists, as Barbara quoting Lenin said, not unity with the distorters and betrayers of Marxism, or the exact things. I mean, on the sort of specific issue, I mean, there's a common tendency to sort of present the CPGB project as like, well, we'll all kind of munch ourselves together and then we'll sort of work it out later, and that's precisely not. I mean, I imagine, in terms of that we would both view any kind of this is a long-term issue and not something that, as I was trying to say, it's not a quick fix. It absolutely isn't. I mean, we've been ranting on about this for 30 years now, At least originally we could tell people to join the CPGB and try and throw out the bureaucrats. I mean, now what do we do? But it's a long-term, we're a long-term organisation. We're a patient organisation. Defining the far left, well, as a percentage, I mean, does anyone have a calculator? What's 65 million divided by 10,000? I'm going to be generous.
Okay, that's fine.
It's small, and it wasn't always that small. You could include the CPGB as a whole, but still, it's never been a huge force in this country numerically. It's been more influential than it is now. Addressing the need for a party. I mean, you say, well, it's it isn't self-evident to everyone. I'm sure I think I can see faces around in the crowd who would object to the idea that it's self-evident. But I think once there's a peculiar phenomenon where often anarchists start off being anti-partyists and then end up forming organisations that are they can't quite call parties, but nonetheless have a organised membership structure and some form of discipline and that kind of thing. It's just it's a means for getting people to act in concert, and whether you erroneously represent yourself as a trade union, as the Wobblies used to, or whatever, actually what you're doing is forming a party. The thing is, it's better to do these things consciously. You might tend to make a job of it rather than accidentally forming a party. It's just it's straightforward, kind of anti-party politics. You see a lot of it about now, kind of like, oh, they're all masses. It's obviously the flip side to that. Well, then who's in charge? So it's going to typically that's a sort of has kind of Bonapartist tendencies, that there's a man on horseback who'll sort them all out, kind of thing. So definitely, for me, the need for a party is straightforward, simply from the fact that people keep on forming them even if they don't want to. Labour and the Democrats, if the trade unions disaffiliated from Labour tomorrow, cancelled all the standing orders, the Labour Party will be bankrupt by Christmas. It's reliant on connections to organised battalions of the working class for its current survival. That won't necessarily always be the case. I mean, there is the example, say, of the Communist Party of Italy turning into a party explicitly modelled on the US Democrats, but it's not the case for the US Democrats. It's got large amounts of state funding, corporate funding. If the unions gave up, their core vote would drop because they'd have less activists getting out the core vote, but they'd live with it. That's the difference. The Labour Party is materially connected to the trade unions and to the working class. So, as I said, the bourgeois workers' party is still an accurate description. It's more and more common on the left for people to just say, well, it's gone now because Blair and Clause 4 and so forth. But I think that more tells you about these particular individuals' vision of socialism, that somehow the Labour Party used to match up to it, rather than anything about the Labour Party. I mean, you were directing it mostly at Barbara, but the idea of a kind of mass social democratic, left social democrat movement emerging, would that be good, or would that be helpful? I mean, firstly, stuff like the US Labour Party, well, it's quite similar in unity in this country, is that, well, actually there isn't a serious material basis for it. But, these things, they're all, if you look at, say, South Africa, have a situation where large components of COSATU were getting tired with being in a cross-class alliance with the ANC and want to kind of break off on their own, and if they were to do so, they would probably form a politically dumb but nonetheless more independent class party, and that would improve conditions for further left organisations in South Africa. That's not because that's an answer, it obviously isn't. But if you look at in this country the effect of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Communist Party, there were lots of Trotskyists who thought, now this is our moment, because no one's going to identify it with Stalinism. No. It's actually become so much harder because the CPGB, despite its utter political collapse, was still basically holding together left networks in the unions and providing a stage, an environment where Trots could get their voices in edgeways. And now that's gone. Everything's gone kaboom. But the problem is that then you have to use that opportunity to get rid of the people who are going to lead you to disaster, and that's the failure of the groups to the left of the CP in the old days to actually make that happen, and so the disaster happened. Okay. I might leave it there. I think I had other notes, but
the self-evidence of the need for a party. I mean, this is a debate we have with anarchists, and I didn't really bring it up because I didn't think that was the debate we were having today. But I think what parties are is they're the organisational form of a political programme. So if a political programme is going to have any effect, it needs a party to organise itself to do anything. And if we're going to carry out a revolution, we need a party. I think, that's another argument, I think. Parties are as the organisational form of a programme, they are representative of classes, and the US Democrats are not a working class party. I mean, the Democrats do have a closer relationship and more funding from the AFL-CIO, as I understand it, than the Republicans do, and they are seen as closer to the unions, but they don't have the same organic relationship that the Labour Party here does, or the SPD has in Germany. The Labour Party in Britain was formed explicitly as a party of the trade unions, so it is within the workers' movement. It is a bourgeois workers' party, but parties also, I think, represent different political strands within classes. So what the Labour Party represents is the Labour aristocracy. It represents the programme of the bourgeoisie within the workers' movement, and that's what we mean by bourgeois workers' party. Whereas the kind of party we want to build is a party that represents the actual interests of the working class, the historic interests of the working class. So it's not a sociological thing of who the members are, though that's also important, and that's one of the reasons the Labour Party retains that role, if you like. So what is the theoretical basis for making that distinction? I think that's kind of answered that. And yet it's a common, I know this is very much an issue in America, where it's different from here in that you don't have a Labour Party. So a lot of people are calling for one and saying it would be better to have a Labour Party than not have a Labour Party. And, would there be any advantage, Richard asks. I mean, it is not something we call for. Our comrades in America don't say, we want a social democratic party, everyone else has got one, why shouldn't we have one? We don't say that. And we don't say in Britain we need a better social democratic party that's to the left of Labour. We don't say that either. But at the same time, I think in the conditions in which such a thing was potentially being created, there would be a whole lot of other stuff going on in society. And actually things like this don't arrive fully formed. If there was a move for a mass social democratic party in America, it would be, if it was truly mass, not like the kind of little attempts that there have been to do this, it would be a process of debate and discussion within the workers' movement, a bit like what I was describing about the Socialist Labour Party, but perhaps on an even bigger scale. And I mean, I'm hypothesising here a little bit, but I think that's probably something we would want to be involved in. So we wouldn't call for it to happen, but we would see what was going on there and intersect that movement and try and say, we don't actually need a social democratic party, we need a real workers' party. And that kind of answers your question perhaps about what situation might create that. Is that kind of upsurge in society? And I think that also answers your last question in a way. I mean, what proportion of society is open to Marxist ideas? And you could give a number now of people that even have heard of Marxism. But I think the answer to that question is very dependent on context. And in the situation of a social upsurge, more people will be open to Marxist ideas, and that's why we keep doing what we're doing, because in that situation we can increase that number.
Okay, I was going to open up for questions from the floor. People have questions? Pam?
Two questions. One was about the characterization of the First International versus the Second International. How
Speak up a little louder, Pam.
the characterization of the First International to the Second International. The Second International sort of being presented as that of unity of among Marxists, or actually Lenin characterizing the possibility of a third international as a unity among actual Marxists. But you could say that in the First International, there isn't a concept, obviously, of Marxism per se, and it's not really an international of the working class, since you have these, these sort of like national independence types and people who are who want to raise the political power of the working class through reform and through the votes. And there's sort of this conglomeration being the ideal type. I mean, what might that look like? Were you offering, maybe you weren't offering an ideal type. Were you then, what is adequate to the present? So it seems to me that when you presented this change from the first to the second to the common term.
Are you asking for a historical model or a vision?
No, let me try to rephrase the question. You sort of presented a change from, the first and second to the third international. And I just, it seems to me that you presented how Lenin recognized the rottenness of the second international, and from it derived a particular intervention, right, in which the common term would be a response to a kind of decline of both political practice and thought. So it was an intervention guided by a particular assessment of not only material conditions, but also the conditions on the left. It wasn't a kind of abstract principle. And so in the same kind of spirit, like, it seems to me inadequate to simply sort of repeat that. And since Lenin's assessment comes not only from the assessment of material conditions, but also the assessment of the left and Second International's decline, how could we then think this way about what a party or a left might look like today? I don't know if that's clear. And then the second, the class, and I kind of want to reiterate the question, but I'm not sure if I understand the relationship between the class and the party. What is it that you see yourself and your organization today as practically advancing this project that you presented as having some kind of more principled, broad-based party that can represent the independent interests of the working class? Because my own familiarity with the CPGB, I often find it that your paper in Nature is rather polemical, and though you present yourselves as creating a more broad-based project, that your actual practice is rather sectarian, or is about sort of wedging yourself in the left. And so what in the CPG is the corresponding practice to your goal of forming a broad-based working class party?
Okay, I'll take one question from Lucy, and then we'll have...
Yeah, it's just more about contemporary movements, and the aim of this panel, we were trying to get some speakers as well from representatives of Syriza and Left Unity in the UK. But just to think about Syriza for a minute, what would you both think the most educational thing for the people of Greece would be for Syriza to do now, today? In terms of educating people about what it means to be, in your concept of the left or Marxist.
And thank you for the question. And also, if you want to
answer anyway. I did originally have a bit more about this, but I cut it out because it kind of wasn't my point. My point was mainly about the difference between the second and the third. There were differences between the first and the second. I think James talked about the anarchists being a factor, and it was debates between Marxists and anarchists that basically caused the falling apart of the First International. But it was called the International Workingmen's Association, so it was, despite all the different parts of it, it was conceived of as a workers' party with all the broad gamut of different.
Well, not a party.
Sorry?
It was not conceived as a party.
Depends how you define that, but yeah, I mean there was a working towards through these different organisations, and I think the difference, the key difference in terms of talking about unity is between the second and the third, and Lenin's point there, and you say it's inadequate just to repeat that because the context is different, and I think that's a fair point. I mean, we're kind of looking at the opposite scenario from what Lenin was looking at, which was to take Germany as an example. The SPD was huge, and it had an effect on working class life that those of us in Britain today, and probably most of the other countries in Europe, just cannot conceive that workers' social lives, that everything was connected to the SPD. There was a culture to it, and Lenin and the left of the German party, in calling for a break with this, were doing something really quite radical. It's seen as a bit crazy. Whereas what we've got is the opposite. Is there's all these small groups, and but the politics is the same as what Lenin was doing. He's saying we need to unite around these principles, that we don't vote for war credits. And the equivalent of voting for war credits, I guess, is what attitude you have towards Britain sending troops to Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever. And to the extent we can bring people together around those points, we're almost doing the opposite thing of splits and fusions, but the politics is the same. I think that's the key thing. And I do think it's going to take social upheaval and change in society to shake things up and to make these debates become more real, and people's minds do change in the impact of events, but also because there are people there arguing political line and convincing people. And I guess that kind of answers Lucy's question. I find it a very difficult question, because I think Syriza's made a lot of mistakes and has perhaps I know Harpo knows more about Syriza than I do, but they have capitulated to the idea that some austerity might be necessary to get the Greek economy back on the track again, and that's exactly what a party shouldn't be doing. We should be fighting that. And the Syriza's attitude towards the EU again is seeing it as something a little bit. I forget what they said exactly about that. But I guess what I think should be happening in Syriza is programmatic debate. And the Greek left generally, as well as the left here, I think it's the same answer. But I think we have to examine parties like Syriza, which is important because of the level of support it's getting, and a lot of people in Britain and Germany and so on are quite excited about it. But its programme is still well to the right of what is actually necessary.
I have a hypothetical question for both of you, following up on that.
Another one.
No, but this is very straightforward. So, obviously, neither of you have come from parties big enough to run candidates for parliament, but
You've run candidates for parliament.
you have, well, to be elected. but so I mean, I guess like you said, you don't believe in the parliamentary road, and you didn't really comment exactly on it. I mean, just like what would you see the role of electoral politics for a workers' party being?
Elections are a platform, and we can use that platform. If we were large enough, we would stand candidates in order to make use of. Elections are a time when people in general are more interested in politics, taking more notice. We would want to stand on a revolutionary programme and put that out there.
So you see it as essentially educational?
Yeah, I suppose that would be the primary purpose, yeah. We wouldn't expect to take power in a bourgeois parliament and create socialism in that way. That's the context. That's not how it works.
There's some reservations in that. I guess one addition, which is that it's also actually a way to measure your support. It's a feedback loop as well, which is handy. I think Engels makes that point somewhere, that it's a kind of every so often you get a chance to see where people's heads are at. It's slightly distorted in a country like Britain with a wildly undemocratic voting system where which effectively excludes outsiders from the mainstream parties with some exceptions. I guess the caveat would be that it's impossible to have a socialist society without dismantling the bourgeois state and replacing it with another state, and without the ability to forcibly defend a sort of revolution. It's potentially possible, and indeed, in a certain sense, it has happened that revolutions have begun with a parliamentary election. I mean, Spain is sort of on that model. That the crisis was provoked by the result of an election. So there's no parliamentary road in the sense that there's no I'm Prime Minister now, and as Prime Minister I declare socialism. But there is a certain sense where an electoral victory might be a trigger, or a mass strike, or anything else. You never know on that level. Military defeat is very common, obviously, as well. On the other things, relationship between the class and the party. There's that sort of kind of Hegelian distinction between the class in itself and the class for itself. As a sort of the working class as a sort of just an objective entity, just a slave class, and the working class as an agent of social transformation. And I'd say the point of a party is to be a vehicle for those sections of the class that have that consciousness of a wider historical role to act in society. There's lots of slightly hoary sounding metaphors like it's a weapon, or like that. But the point is, it's an instrument that is in that sense a kind of a vehicle for the old that project of kind of working class transformation of society. And in terms of where we fit into that, we all precisely target our readership is in the first place the small circles of the existing surrounding far left, and more broadly people in the broad kind of workers' movement and progressive movement, who take notice and have on their intellectual and political radar the far left. And so precisely we're targeting the sort of small strands that you could call in that sense the small representatives of the class that are currently in a situation where they think it's that project is viable, or take that project seriously as a thing. I mean, there's no other reason you read the weekly worker. I mean, I one guy is like a hedge fund manager who pays attention to the left for some reason, but he's always on Facebook being a bit of a troll. But I mean, for the most part, if you're interested in that project, then we want you to be interested in our paper, and we don't, in that sense, that the fact that its content is targeted so heavily is on the basis that even among that element, what you might call the vanguard, the broad vanguard of the working class, or people who want to be representatives of the working class movement, they're hopeless and scattered and have a lot to learn. So that's the purpose. And I think on Syriza, I guess it's sort of, I mean, are we talking about one's own hypothetical fantasy Syriza, or the Syriza that actually exists on that level?
I mean, what Syriza, what would be most sort of educational, if people if people in Greece or people across Europe and the world who are watching Syriza, what is the most if Syriza wanted to teach us something about the left, what should they do now?
Well, there's a certain thing that I like about Syriza, which is that they're very fond of sending out people to other countries to try and drum up solidarity, get on the plane and land in London, give a talk, go land in Berlin, give a talk, and try and sort of, I think even though the political nature of Syriza is odd and quite right-wing within the left and all that kind of stuff, I think that is something that I would hope that people would learn from, that they're actually making an effort to support other organisations beyond Greece. So I think that's something that they do that in theory I approve of. In general, I would want them to be laying down roots and refusing to take power, even if they win an election. Okay. That would be educational.
But, okay, so let's follow that thought up that you should refuse to take power even if you're elected. Like, most people, I think, would be rather confused. But a party...
It would be very educational if you did it then, wouldn't it?
Well, would it be educational? You brought up the example of being... The question is, what is being learned from that? I'm trying to... I mean, I understand your point, but I'm trying to say, like, if you talk to the average person and you say you want to found a socialist party or a communist party, their sense is, party is something that runs for office, among other things. And then you tell them, well, but like, even if by some bizarre chance we're elected, we're not going to take power. Right? That sounds like even more strange, or as strange, as, the anarchists who are like, change the world without taking power. I mean, maybe you want to take power in some different way through Soviets, but I'm just sort of, I don't quite see the end game. I mean.
Well, just to clarify that, I started out by saying lay down roots. Of course it doesn't make any sense, because precisely you're relying on the idea that, as is true, that your man in the street looks at politics as something that's done by other people all the way over there. The thing with Syriza that I observe about it is that its actual numerical membership isn't huge. It's got very good votes, but it's not as substantial an organisation as the KKE. So it's this is observing from afar. I'm sure there are Greek people who will correct me if I'm talking nonsense, but that's the point. Of course it doesn't make sense, because precisely it isn't the kind of party that can build an understanding of a different way of doing politics too, just like, vote for me, I'll solve all your problems for you, I'll be Prime Minister and declare socialism. So of course it's counterintuitive and seems bizarre, but once you explain to people that, well, hold on a minute, so we're in charge, what the fuck do you think we can do in Greece? What can they do? So they now decide that they might need to implement some cuts. Well, no shit. If you're going to take power in Greece alone, you will need to make cuts. It's a fact. So they need to, but that kind of sense of urgency, we need to take power and defend people, actually leads to kind of, and then when that happens, and when they are hammering people, well, how's the Greek left going to be looking 5 years from now? Syriza actually comes from a similar disaster in the early 90s.
Yeah, you've been reading work as Vanguard, haven't you? The Spartacus League have quite recently come up with this position that they won't even stand for positions of executive office because of the danger of actually winning and having to take power. And
Not too great a
Nice
danger.
problems to have.
yeah, and that's the point, really. I mean, I think if I got elected to Parliament on the IBT's programme, there would be something else going on in the world, really, than just me being elected. There would be a context, and I think the Russian Revolution as often provides some lessons for this. I mean, during 1917, there were elections to the Duma, the Russian Parliament, and at the same time people were forming Soviets, and the Bolsheviks actually boycotted that election because they said it's become irrelevant now. It's the Soviets and it's what's going on there, and there's all kinds of different contests of what might be going on if revolutionaries actually were getting elected. So it's really quite difficult to answer that as a hypothetical question, but I think it shows that Syriza is not a revolutionary party, and that it's been come close-ish to taking power without that kind of revolutionary upsurge in society, really, and that creates that dilemma. And I think it would actually be quite interesting, as James says, to refuse to take power, but I mean, we are not in the business of running the capitalist state. We would be doing something else. But I don't think that means, as the Spartacus League argue, that you shouldn't stand for elections. I think it's a key measure of how our propaganda feeds out into the world and allows us to stand on our programme. And which is also, this is again, I think, to go back to the original unity thing, a lot of these unity projects are about unity in elections. Some of them, like Tusk here in Britain, are quite explicitly an electoral unity project, and people come together and they stand on elections on this lowest common denominator program, because they say, well, at least we'll have some left candidates. But if you're not even standing on your own program, then what is the point of standing for election? What does that actually achieve?
Just kind of quickly add something like where we have stood candidates, which we've done a few times. We've done it on like kind of full revolutionary as all hell. We're communists. We're going to overthrow everything. Sort of the platform. I'm sure Barbara would object to certain clauses in it and everything. But we've gone out there and we've gotten basically the same votes that the Socialist Party or whatever will come out on their platform of who want cuts bad. Like we know we get humiliated, but the point is we get humiliated exactly the same level that people who do the do. So there's not even changing.
Any more questions?
I have a question that broader field or something, so I'm not sure if it's accurate, but we were talking about the problem of these, call them like bourgeois, ecological movements and feminist movements. The question is not only, okay, how is it about like unity in the left, but there's not only non-unity in the Marxist left as we see, there's also non-unity in the left if we take it like as a broader entity. And the question would only be like, do you think it's a necessity to consider these groups, positions, movements, and to, work with, or, to have discussion, however, or is that something that's not like in any interest? Because if you say, yeah, okay, ecological positions or feminist positions or whatever, have like a bourgeois character because they're like apart from class struggle, how to deal with that, or don't deal with it anyways.
Who's going first?
I definitely think we shouldn't ignore groups like that. But I think what I said before is the key thing, that they are raising these issues outside the context of class. And in fact, the economy and gender relations, women's rights, etc., are both class issues, and that ecological destruction actually impacts the working class like everything else much more. We would argue that it's only by having a planned economy and a communist society that we can actually really begin to manage the Earth's resources in a sensible way, that capitalist greens is an impossibility. It's while profit is the driving force behind society, then the environment is always going to come second to that. So we would be making these arguments to these people. We would be wanting to split these movements and win the left wing of these movements towards socialism. And we would be raising these issues ourselves. I mean, issues of women's rights are really important, and yes, some of the Marxist left historically has kind of disregarded this and saying, well, after the revolution, women will be free. But actually, a lot of what we fight around today in terms of women's rights issues are examples of what I was talking about of the United Front, like abortion rights. And actually, abortion is a class issue, because pretty much anyone can get an abortion if they have enough money and privilege, but it's in different societies, in different contexts, it's working class women, young women, poor women who can't get abortions. So it's, all these issues are very much class issues, and we would be working with bourgeois feminists who agree with us that women should have the right to an abortion, but we would be making the points about class politics at the same time. And that's a key part of our program, and how we win people to the idea of class politics, because they're interested in these ideas because they affect them. Does that answer the question?
I know.
I mostly that really, but yeah, it's worth noting that I think this is true, that the best-selling pamphlet in the entire Second International during the kind of pre-war period was Socialism and Women by Babel. Like that was, and there's a sense in which, like nowadays, kind of if there's a women's rights issue, women's liberation issue in the news, it's thought of as like, oh, it's a feminist thing, right? So you get a feminist to talk about it, and you get some horrible religious person to oppose it, but it's thought of as something for feminists, and that's kind of a shame, because it wasn't always, that was a contested field once, that people were fighting for leadership of like the struggle for women's liberation, and now we have a situation where typically leftists will kind of defer to feminism, and it's like, well, that's we'll do put some feminism in here to deal with the women's issues, rather than coming up with a distinctly Marxist approach to the issue. The thing is, that's part of a broader historical thing where the left, the Marxist left in that period had a kind of conception of its role was to kind of organise the working class into a party that had the overthrow of capitalism as its conscious aim, but also in doing so to lead broader society, to become the tribune of the oppressed. This is very clear, particularly in the Russian context, because the working class was so small, and you have Lenin arguing against the economists who just wanted it to be factories and so on, saying no, you have to get these disaffected statisticians of the Tsarist regime, you have to get the students on side, you have to lead these people, to lead the peasants most importantly. Right, so it's part of a broader project of winning the society to the leadership of the working class, beyond merely the ranks of the
So then a question for both of you. Why do you think that, say, since the 60s and 70s, the role of the new social movements and a kind of multi-sectional approach has become so popular. I mean, a traditional new left narrative is, well, that shows the failure of the old left to address these issues. But if you reject that narrative, then why do you think this has become the dominant narrative? Is it, I mean, well, maybe it's not in Britain, but it is in the US.
No, it is. I'm just trying to. I mean, this has been the case since, I think, the 70s. What's today called intersectionality was once called triple oppression theory. And it's the same old story. And I mean, yes, there were some failures of the old left to address this, but I mean, actually, as James said, the Second International was writing about this. It is an issue that the Marxist movement has always written about. I think it's become dominant recently, and the reason it's dominant recently is because of the weakness of the left.
I mean, I'd agree with that. The issue is, like, how old's the old left? What they're talking about there is the official CP, the Labour Party or whatever, which tended to accommodate a certain slightly dire forms of sectionalism. It was a slow then fast process, I suppose, of kind of trying to deal with those sort of sexist kind of biases in the trade union movement and so forth. But it did happen eventually, and in that sense, people were open to those ideas. So it's always been bizarre that because they were accommodating to sectionalism, they weren't fighting for something that actually most, again, it was, if you look at like the miners' strike, the incredible importance of like the organisation of the miners' wives and that transformative effect that had on the miners' communities, where previously it was very sort of traditional family stuff. That stuff is waiting to be done, but it wasn't. And of course, then you have the growth of feminism and so forth, as people who at least were out there taking it seriously and fighting for things that needed to be fought for. And since then, because it is precisely the weakness of the far left, both like in terms of now numerically and in terms of direct influence, but in terms of its political weakness and its inability to seriously deal with these issues.
You first, and then you go.
Yeah, there was some mention earlier of the 21 points. I think the 21 points was the right terms for the wrong international. If it had been around in the second international, it might have had some positive effect, but it totally failed to do the job in the third international, and it's totally irrelevant now. As regards the Syriza question, I think James is on something. Don't take power. I'd go slightly further. Don't get involved with the bourgeois state. And if you want to extend the kind of logical absurdity, if the Left Unity project really did take off and stood parliamentary candidates and got 100 MPs elected, that would be 10 million quid in salaries that could be quite usefully spent. But it ain't going to happen, so my advice to Left Unity would be let's not go there. A third slightly trivial point on the subject of analogous movies. One of Trotsky's friends suggested one, the bridge over the River Kwai. You got a cross-class unity, between the officers in the lower ranks, to engage in a project, the bridge, that is only of use to the enemy and has to be destroyed by an external vanguard force led by an American. So,
Nikos, and then we'll take.
I have 3 questions, one for both of you and one for John. So you both emphasized the need for unity, even if you emphasize it in different terms. What I get from James is that unity among the left means a party based on program and the independence of the working class. What I get from Barbara is the unity of radical Marxists under a radical and more theoretical Marxist program. Translating these 2 positions into real terms, however, it seems unlikely, even if these positions are proved right, that they lead to the overcome of capitalism, as you both mentioned in your remarks. So my question would be like, what if the unity projects that you wish for succeed? Where would that lead? Now my question to Barbara, following the question of Pam. You mentioned the unity of Marxists. My question is, do you think that the people of the Second International were Marxists? I mean, all of them? And Lenin in April 1917 distinguished himself even from the greatest part of Bolsheviks. Was that part of the Bolsheviks not Marxist? And possibly more radical Marxist than many Marxists in the left today? And now a question to James. You mentioned a lot of things that emphasize the need for the left unity, and in many things I would agree with you. My question is, can unity itself, the concept of unity itself, be an obstacle for radical politics? I mean, I'm not referring to groups that can be in unity projects and undermine them by expressing reformist ideas or stuff like this. I mean the concept of unity itself. For example, unity can become an obsession for the left in front of austerity measures, of economic crisis, and the march of right-wing politics. Pretty much this is what is happening in Greece, in my opinion. So would that kind of unity as a response to a danger, rather than as a part of an ongoing social situation where left politics are being discussed and influence many people, would that kind of unity be radical, in your opinion?
Just before they answer that, could we just change the tape again? Just think about that for a minute. Because you want to rephrase it and part of it, or just
Do either of you want any water?
Just to sort of fill the time, pour out some more. Awkward silence.
Left always meets in airless rooms.
There's aircon in this room. You were complaining about that
I was
earlier.
complaining about that.
That's because we can't afford nice rooms.
You need a chair.
I was just conscripted. Laurie, what time are we supposed to finish?
8:30.
It's 8:56.
Okay, so we'll just
Maybe
finish.
this is the last one.
We'll
Yeah,
take
this is it.
this will be the last question.
Yeah.
Okay?
And so we have plans to kind of go out for drinks in Dalston in a place called the Liquor Store. You gotta get off at Dalston Junction. You can come ask me if you need more specifics, but if you have a smartphone, just look up the Liquor Store at Dalston. It closes at midnight, but if people really want to go out afterwards more, Dalston's always a good place. But it should hold us from 10 to 12, just as a kind of like Saturday night thing to do.
Okay, we're starting now? Okay, take it away for Nico's questions.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start with Nico's because David's disappeared. Unity is an obstacle. Well, I mean, in a sense, you know, I've kind of tried to describe situations where, like, the need for unity is used to justify things that actually objectively result in the opposite result. I mean, you know, the reason it can be so used is because it's so obviously something we need that, of course, it becomes something that you can use to hold people hostage if you're doing politics in a particular sort of way. And yes, I mean, the question is always, like, on what terms are you united? The collapse of, like, the SPD in Germany was made much, much worse because people weren't prepared. People, broader layers who didn't agree, particularly after, and as time went on, increasingly didn't agree with the parliamentary fractions vote for war credits, could not countenance actually breaking with them, which in effect meant that the German state had a veto on any politics of the SPD. They ended up completely trapped. Of course, we don't want that. We want to be able to advocate politics on an independent level. So yes, I mean, it's a concrete question, but the underlying need for united class action is I think still straightforwardly there. I can't remember, so was there something else you were throwing at me there, or?
Yeah, the first question was, what if the unity project that you wish for succeed? What would that mean?
Well, I mean, it's an imponderable, but there are, you know, historical examples, many historical examples where just the act of uniting has been the sort of the thing that sort of removes a barrier that no one even knew was there, sort of thing, and you know, growth and strength of, like, working class parties comes very quickly. If you look at the SPD itself, you know, there were two sort of smallish, you know, 10,000, 15, 20,000 strong organisations of socialists, working class socialists in Germany. They fused. Marx didn't like the programme very much, but they went ahead anyway, and it became pretty rapidly became a serious mass organisation, and that was able to survive a period of kind of intense state repression and come out stronger and larger, and then that had international ripples because, you know, people in France say, I want one of those. People in Russia say, we need a party on to get a split from the Russian populace in the direction of kind of the Marxists in Germany. And so that's, yeah, obviously very much best case scenario is that, you know, it does trigger something, and you know, but whatever you know the situation throws at the poor beleaguered souls on the British far left, we would be better placed to turn to either defend ourselves or turn it into a kind of an advantage for our overall project if we were united. I mean, at the moment, it's just everyone's desperately trying to scream over each other about how cuts are bad, and it's pretty undignified, really. I mean, I might quickly respond to David, even I'm not sure if he's gone. No, his hat's still here. Okay, maybe I'll leave that for the time being.
If the unity project I want succeeds, where would that lead? To a revolution. That's the kind of unity we need as a party that's capable of carrying out a revolution. So that's what I count as success. I'm not sure if that's quite answering what you ask, because obviously there will be a struggle involved there, but that is the objective. I don't want to build unity that's not capable of doing that. We may have all kinds of stages in this process, but that's success. Your second question, I think you're kind of asking what do we define as a Marxist. I mean, you use some concrete examples, and I think the answer is that not everyone who calls themselves a Marxist or who says they're influenced by Marx or reads Marx is, in my book, a Marxist. I think Marxism is about a program that is about not just the writings of one man, but a way of thinking, a way of thought that leads to a way of action. So, I mean, Marxism was in many ways kind of the official theory of the Second International, but I think a lot of what the Second International did was not Marxist, and a lot of the people within the Second International were not Marxists, and I think voting for war credits was not the act of Marxists, because Marxists are about class struggle, and that was about supporting the imperialist German forces in a war. So that answers that. In terms of struggles within the Bolshevik Party and disagreements with Lenin, I mean, I'm not taking this so far to say that there is only exactly one pure form of Marxism. I think there is room for space and debate and differences within that context. So I'm not sure exactly who you're talking about, but I think, yes, people can disagree with Lenin and still be a Marxist. The point is, are they for the basics of class struggle and the interests of the working class in a historical sense? And James accused me earlier of excessive purity, and I guess that's what I'd really like to disagree with here, in that there is room for this debate, and we are actually, no one has the pure program in a little book we can slap on the table and say, that's it, if we all follow this, revolution will follow. There's a process of debate going on, and I think, so I was talking to someone earlier and saying, it's not because we in the IBT think we're cleverer than everyone else or anything like that. I think it's that we're standing on a historical tradition that has learned these lessons from experience, and we're going to learn more lessons from experience, and there's going to be more new things that happen to us, like the degeneration of the Soviet Union was a new thing, the fall of the Soviet Union was a new thing, and Marx has had to adapt to these things, and there's going to be more of that, but we have to have some lines, and I don't think it's excessive purity to say, in James's example, I'm not going to vote for so-called workers' parties that are in alliance with bourgeois parties. That is an effectively voting for this bloc that goes against everything we stand for. And this issue of the Popular Front is just, it comes up again and again because it's the key one of the example of what kind of unity we don't need. And I think the CPGB are very, very wrong in dismissing this, in seeing that is excessive purity. I think it's key. I think unless we get that right, and some of the other issues we've been talking about tonight, then to go back to your first question, the unity project of the working class taking power, then that's not going to succeed unless we draw these lines. No, it's not excessive.
Okay. Oh, Alex, you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
And then this will be the last one.
Okay. I'll make it really good.
You better.
So James, you kind of you were saying what left unity is these days is like huddling for warmth, which I kind of agree with. This idea that left unity has become more of a show of weakness than a show of strength. And then Barbara, you're saying, for you to when you were talking about running in elections, if you were to win in an election, it means that there's something else going on in society. If there's a broader upsurge in the society, and my question is kind of relating those two. Is there a possibility for a left unity project that actually is going to show its strength? Because right screw the rest of those guys anyway, we're gonna just ride this wave. So is left unity these days only about weakness, or is it possible to have a left unity for strength?
Well, I mean, I don't. Talking about left unity in the present day as being about weakness strikes me. Well, I mean, strikes me as odd because the left isn't united. You know, the left is weak, but it's not united. Left unity, the project by that name, does not unite even significant sections of the far left. And it's actually quite sectarian and hostile to other sections of the far left. You know, ironically. You know, because yeah, of course we're for left unity. You join us and forget about all those terrible people out there. Kind of. So I mean, at this point, well, that is the expression. That is the expression of the weakness, and it's because they're basing themselves on politics. They can't actually unite each other. So I mean, as a point of strength, well. Yes, I would say that there is. It's not going to happen like tomorrow or the day after. But like if by some magical cosmic ray shower or something, people suddenly decided that they should all agree with us and started waving around my little red book. Okay, assuming that we do have half a decent idea about how to do things, I would expect that to be a much stronger project, or even if it was the SWP's politics or anything, it would be a stronger project to have more impact in broader society than it does now, and you would see an effect in trade union movement, in the Labour Party, and broader society. We're in a pretty dire state, but it's not. You have to remember that it's not as bad as we, by our own collective weakness, make it look. There is.
What about it is not as bad as it looks? Just the inherent capacity of capitalism, or what?
Yeah, capacity. Well, the fact that capitalism is still the working class is displacing is growing as a class, as an objective quality. Globally, it's bigger than it's ever been. I think it's probably a majority of global society at this point. That it's just how difficult it's proven to get rid of the shit little residual connections of the working class to the working class of the Labour Party. People have been trying to do that for decades, and it's kind of resisted because it does still function as a kind of really low level class vote, and there is a level of consciousness that one is working class, but not obviously the level of consciousness that means anything more than you're being exploited by sort of screwed over by a boss or the lower echelons of society. So the material is there, and I think people are still thinking in broader society that I'm encouraged when I just have conversations with quote unquote ordinary people that they're not actually as closed-minded as stereotypes suggest, that you can seriously discuss with people, that level of awareness kind of exists of there being political questions to be dealt with. This is getting a bit sort of vague at this point, but I think it's we're not in an utterly hopeless situation. We're just in an utterly hopeless state of affairs, and I think you would see improvement pretty quickly if there was a meaningful force out there that was just saying, look, we need to get rid of all this and organise on a class basis, and was able to make that argument. But no one really wants to at this point, is the problem. And thus, as a peculiar side effect, they can't unite.
Do you want to respond?
Yes, definitely. There is a possibility, if it's the right kind of project, the right kind of unity, the right kind of program, then yes, it would be a show of strength. It could achieve something. Most of us have spent most of our political lives through very bad times, and if there's one thing we learn from reading history is that things change, and things will change, and there is a possibility for the show of strength. There are, if you even look at the world today, there are struggles breaking out. what is missing is the revolutionary leadership and the revolutionary program, and but definitely there's all kinds of possibilities there.